Good evening and warm welcome to all the participants this evening. I'm extremely happy to welcome you all to this 96th WiseViews Leadership Conversation. And please join me in welcoming Mr. T.N. Hari. Good evening, sir, and welcome.
Thank you, sir.
What a pleasure to have a popular leader like you on this platform. And this is the 96th week we are conducting this leadership conversation, sir. Every Friday, one leader. And that's how 6:30 p.m. has become a kind of a significant time for us. We call it IST, ICFAI Standard Time at 6:30 p.m. on Fridays. Thank you so much, sir, for agreeing to be part of these wonderful conversations. What I will do is I'll quickly do a brief introduction of the leader and then hand it over back to him for this conversation. Opening remarks for about 20 minutes by Mr. T.N. Hari. So that's the schedule which we follow every Friday. Let me share my screen. Yeah, WiseViews Leadership Conversations. Today we have this topic of story of India's startup ecosystem from independence until now. Yeah, intro and talk and Q&A in the next 1 hour. The very popular leader, infectious smile, Mr. T.N. Hari is with us. He is an angel investor, an evangelist, thought leader, and influencer in the startup ecosystem. He wears all these hats. He's an alumnus of the prestigious institutions, IIT Madras and IIM Calcutta. He has authored 8 books and also writes for the center page of Mint quite regularly. Saying No to Jugaad, Pony to Unicorn, Diversity Beyond Tokenism have been bestsellers. Mr. Hari has been part of the leadership teams at 5 high-growth startups and helped shape their growth journeys and exits, including a listing on NASDAQ. 3 of these went on to become unicorns. He is also passionate about helping founders build great companies and supporting women leaders discover their potential. Based on the alignment of mission with his capabilities, and if the mission is inspiring, he also contributes to a few companies at strategic level as he occupies board positions in some of these companies. Thank you very much, sir, once again for being part of this conversation. I'll also briefly introduce Prof. Prasad. He's the Director of Academic Wing at ICFAI Group. He's the Professor and Course Mentor for Online MBA program. His areas are strategy and entrepreneurship. He brings with him a rich experience of more than 3 decades as an entrepreneur, as a corporate leader, as well as academic at ICFAI now. He holds a BTech from IIT Bombay and a PGDM from IIM Kolkata. He published several articles, edited books, and presented papers both in India and abroad. This is me, and that's fine. We will straight away welcome Mr. T.N. Hari to start his session. Over to you, sir. We are all ears and eagerly waiting. I have received tremendous feedback when I posted the invite on Facebook and LinkedIn and with other platforms as well. And several other peoples and my friends in other campuses also have written to me stating that they had met you somewhere in some conference and shared those anecdotes, and they were eagerly looking forward to listening to you. So thank you so much, sir, and welcome, and please start your session.
Thank you so much for having me. Really feel very honored and privileged speaking to all of you. So what I will do is I will speak as requested for about 20 minutes. And the theme that I will be talking about is the story of entrepreneurship in India from independence till now, where we are, and probably, the journey ahead a little bit as well. So the first phase of entrepreneurship for me, is really from 1947 till liberalization, which was about 1991. So the first almost 45 years of independence was a typical license control Raj, where the government chose to occupy the commanding heights of the economy, decided to, control manufacturing, decided to do business, as much as, enable and regulate business. They also decided to do business. So in some ways, this was an era which is eminently forgettable because, there is a saying that Jahan Raja Vyapari, wahan pe Praja Bhikari, which means that when the king chooses to do business, when the government chooses to do business, the people feel very paupered, which means that they don't do really well. So it was those days, when only family businesses ever chose to do work in business. There were very few or no first generation entrepreneurs. Everybody was intimidated by the kind of regulation that existed, the kind of controls that existed. Profit wasn't a good word. Entrepreneurs, businessmen were not respected. So many, first potential first generation entrepreneurs took up jobs in the private sector. Some of them took up jobs in the government, but very few went on to, run businesses. And something changed, after liberalization, which is the first 45 years led to probably, bankruptcy of the Indian economy. We ran out of, all dollar reserves, and we had to pledge our gold in the Bank of England to get concessions. And the government had no option but to open up the economy. Several, customs duties were lowered, and many companies in India for the first time began to face the heat and began to face competition. I worked for a company called Tata Steel, and Tata Steel was a classic example of a company that had grown very complacent during the control era, where the sales folks had no work to do. They would go out and sell steel and charge customers 120% advance. So if you bought 100 tons of steel, you had to pay 120% of the price of 100 tons as advance. And after the steel was supplied, the 20% would be returned to you maybe after 3 months. So those were the kind of pricing terms. And therefore, the sales folks just had to be busy doing lunches, dinners, and playing golf, and did nothing else. But liberalization changed everything. And for the first time, they began facing the heat. And these companies had gotten very bloated during those periods. So for example, 70,000 employees produced about 3.5 million tons of steel. And in the Western world, in Japan, in China, in Europe, probably 7,000 people, or even less than 7,000 people, 3,000 people produce 4 million tons of steel. So that was the kind of order of magnitude difference in efficiencies, productivity. So a company like Tata Steel had to undergo rapid transformation. And fortunately, at that point of time, there was a leader called Dr. J.J. Irani, who was the right leader for the occasion, who helped transform the company and helped it become very competitive. But the first 45 years actually killed whatever spirit of enterprise that India had. And there were no first generation entrepreneurs, only those who knew how to manipulate the system, those who knew how to play the game well, entered business. Nobody else had the guts to enter business. Now, sometime in 2000, Y2K, was a chance happening for India. Sometimes they say, some events happen by chance and they create some very positive unintended consequences. And that was what happened in the year Y2K. So all the computer, in computers that were in vogue, the date was stored, the year was stored as a 2-digit number. So for example, the year 95 was stored as not 1995, but simply 95. They were saving on 2 bits. So what happened as the year 2000 approached was the last 2 digits would be zeros, and the computers would get confused and would think that 2000 is same as 1900. So a lot of code, in fact, trillions of lines of code had to be rewritten. And the only way that could be done was employing manual labor. And fortunately, India, had a large number of English-speaking, low-cost resources that the Western world managed to use and could write or rewrite trillions of lines of code. And in the process, I think the Western world also realized that India has a tremendous amount of talent. And a lot of so-called higher end work also could be outsourced to India. So a lot of application maintenance, application development could be done out of India. So this was a big boost because for the first time, Indian companies could be built by first generation entrepreneurs. These first generation entrepreneurs did not have to interact with the government, did not have to deal with the creaky infrastructure of India. They had to deal with American and European companies, which were run pretty professionally. Payments were never a problem, contracts were honored, and it was easy to deal with those companies. So many of these, first generation entrepreneurs built multi-billion dollar businesses. And for the first time, the culture in corporate changed. Until then, they were all family run businesses, very hierarchical. The family owner's son would come and begin to call the shots. and very senior level people could do nothing excepting pay respects to some of these family scions. So a lot of that changed. For the first time, you had professionally run companies. People, were respected. Employees were respected, treated with respect by professional managers and even the founders and entrepreneurs, because the founders and entrepreneurs were also themselves professionals, and they understood the importance of treating people with respect. So for the first time, I think we had companies in India which matched global standards in terms of culture and in terms of the way they were run, with the degree of professionalism that was there in the Western world. And also for the first time, many people in India began experiencing Western standards of living. So many of these employees in IT services companies, at least at senior leadership levels, began to get well paid, began to get paid international salaries, and were able to lead some amazing lives. And for the first time, you had, lot of first-class residential complexes coming up in cities in India, beautiful offices, very high caliber infrastructure, at least in the offices. But once you step out of the offices, the roads were the same, the airports were the same, the power infrastructure was the same. And therefore, many of these companies actually ran, bus services so that they could bring employees to the workplace on time. They had to have digital, diesel generation sets because the power itself was not very reliable. So all that had to be done, but nevertheless, the office infrastructure was amazing. The work culture was amazing. All that for the first time India began experiencing. Having said that, many of these entrepreneurs did not solve India's problems. They solved problems of the Western world. The Western world had high labor costs, and these entrepreneurs built companies that used labor arbitrage to get the same work done out of India at much lower costs and prices. As a result of which, the Western, companies which were under profit pressures could suddenly become profitable. So these companies did not have to deal with many of India's wicked problems. So many people in India felt, that while we are solving problems of the West, India's problems continue to evade us. And we probably will never have a solution to these problems because they are so hard to solve. And they could be about, providing goods and services to, underprivileged people, solving the problem of bad infrastructure, solving the problem of primary school education, solving the problem of extreme poverty levels. So these seemed very difficult problems. But something again changed in the year 2008. So I would call that as the third phase of entrepreneurship in India. The third phase of entrepreneurship was with the setting up of a company called Flipkart. And the reason why Flipkart got set up at precisely that point of time was that many of the venture capital firms, hedge funds, had actually experienced a lot of success in China. Just to give you an idea, there was a company called Yahoo in the US, which had invested in Alibaba. And when Alibaba went public in 2014, the amount of money that Yahoo made by selling their stake in Alibaba was more than they made by selling the whole of Yahoo to Verizon. So that was the extent of the China success story. So those who had made money in China, those who had missed the China bus, all of them wanted to come to India because India was the next big macroeconomic story. So many things came together for the first time in India, including venture capital, entrepreneurial energy, and the whole network of mentors, angel investment platform. Everything came together. And for the first time, there were entrepreneurs who began solving India's problems. Flipkart tried to create India's Amazon. There were many, all these companies, subsequent startups, were inspired by these two individuals, Sachin and Binny Bansal. Sachin and Binny Bansal, I think, inspired hundreds, if not thousands, of other young Indians to take up entrepreneurship and solve many of these so-called wicked problems of India. So, for example, you had a Dunzo, you had a Big Basket, you had an InMobi. You think of any, Swiggy, Zomato, all of them began solving India's problems, and many of them went on to become actually very valuable companies. And it's a different matter that some of these companies, when they went public, actually struggled quite a bit and their valuations collapsed. That's a different story altogether. But many of these companies created valuable brands that we probably cannot live without. So, for example, all of us use Paytm or PhonePe for transactions every day for making payments. All of us procure food, using Swiggy or Zomato, or grocery using Big Basket, and getting a plumber on Urban Company. So many of these companies became brands that today we cannot imagine life without. And the interesting thing about this phase of entrepreneurship was that they targeted those 100 million consumers at the top of the socio-economic pyramid. They still found it difficult to solve problems of underprivileged India, the next 400 million Indians. So it's always easy to build products and services for the wealthy because they have problems of convenience. So solving for their convenience at a price point that made these companies profitable was not particularly difficult. In spite of that, these companies are still not profitable. It's a different thing, but at least they could attempt to become very profitable. But still, the twist destiny, I would say, continue to evade the next 400 million Indians. Now, the fourth phase of entrepreneurship to me is companies and startups getting set up to solve the problems of the next 400 million Indians. So, for example, you have companies in the agri-tech space like AgroStar, Dehat, which are trying to solve problems of the farmers. Typically, 20 years back, nobody would have dared to even try to solve problems of the next 400 million Indians because the next 400 millions don't have purchasing power and therefore they don't have the ability to pay for products and services that will make the providers of products and services profitable. But a lot of things again came together. UPI came together, Aadhaar, Geo smartphone, the broadband. So it is a combination of factors, right from Aadhaar to broadband to smartphone to Geo, in fact, coming together to be able to, make the creation of products for the next 400 million Indians and selling them in smaller packet sizes, reasonably economical to do so. Prior to that, for example, if you take, not many companies attempted to build businesses for 400 million Indians, but there were companies. So, for example, if you take the story of, Kevin Care, prior to Kevin Care, it was, there was a gentleman called Chinni Krishnan, who was a very famous businessman in Karlur. He set up this company which made, shampoo and talcum powder and sold them in small pouches, in sachets. And people wondered, how can, a sachet be economical at all? Because the cost of distribution per milliliter of the shampoo becomes so high. So how can you even make it economical? But then Chinni Krishnan had understood the psychology of the next 400 million Indians. He realized that these people have a cash flow problem and therefore they might not buy in large pack sizes, but they're willing to buy in small pack sizes and use shampoo for special occasions, even talcum powder for special occasions. So he realized the consumer psychology, and they had built a company that was profitable already. So it was just a question of, in some ways, replicating the idea of a chota packet or a small packet, metaphorical small packet, and selling different kinds of products and services. And that has suddenly become possible because of what I told you, which is technology coming together, whether it was Geo, whether it was an Aadhaar, whether it was UPI. All of these came together to make the chota packet, delivery of the chota packet, reasonably economical. So I think that's the fourth phase of entrepreneurship in India. And fourth phase of entrepreneurship is very interesting because we are seeing for the first time entrepreneurs who are coming from tier 2, tier 3 towns of India. And it's important that they come from those tier 2, tier 3 towns of India, because if you don't grow up, if you have not grown up in those places, if you have not experienced the problems of consumers in those places, how can you build products and services for them? So it's very interesting to see, entrepreneurs who don't even speak English, who are not very articulate, but yet deeply understand the customer and therefore are able to build these businesses. I think India in many ways is transforming, and the cricket and, to me, films are a very good indication of how society in India is progressing. For example, when I was young, the Ranji Trophy match, tournament used to mostly be won by Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Mumbai. But today, if you see the last 20 odd years, the Ranji Trophy is being won by states like Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Bengal, and they're doing really well. If you go to an IPL tournament, you would find that many of the amazing players are from tier 2, tier 3 towns of India. They barely speak English, but they ooze confidence. They're extremely confident. They play the game well. They're extremely confident. So this newfound confidence is not just in cricket and IPL, but it's a story of India, which is that we as a nation seem to be becoming a little more confident of ourselves. I'll just tell you a few more things before I stop. So I think, as we built out the services economy, post, liberalization, post Y2K, a $300 billion services, economy got created. It gave India a lot of confidence. It gave India swagger on the world stage. And people were still asking questions like, we are good at building services companies, but can we ever build a great product company? And for a long time, the answer was that probably it's very difficult for India to build a product company. And there was some degree of pessimism. But I think a lot of that has changed. What has changed, if you ask me? I think what has changed is the following, which is if you have to build a product, then you need to understand the consumer really well. And India was never a really big market for products. The big markets for product was always the Western world. And what happened when we created the services companies and services economy is that we began to understand Western consumers really well. So the entire services economy laid the foundation for us as a country to be able to build product companies. So you are seeing a lot of product companies being created on the back of our services capabilities and our deep understanding of the Western consumer and the Western markets. So that's a big change, which is that India is becoming a product nation. And we are also becoming a deep tech nation, which is that if you see, for the first time, an Indian space company launched a rocket. We have a company called Space Route. We have a company called Agnikul, which has created these launch pads and platforms. And we are having several other deep tech companies being set up in India. So I think, from services to products to deep tech, we are seeing some of these changes that are happening. Now, two more points I'll make before I stop. The other is, one is that many of these, companies which I talked about, whether it was Zomato or a Paytm, while they've created some amazing brands without which we can't even lead our lives today, somehow have not been very profitable. They have never bothered to build businesses in a very sustainable way. As a result of which, even after listing, these companies are struggling to be profitable. So the profitability seems to be in many ways a distant dream. So is this going to throw water on our startup journey? I think yes, in some ways, if we are not very careful, if we don't try and build sustainable companies and sustainable businesses, the entire startup optimism is going to die out. And people will once again in India be reluctant to do startups because they will find it difficult to find exits. So I think it's important to build companies and businesses very sustainably, not just focus on crazy growth at the cost of profitability, but also do the right things. So I would say build a SHE enterprise, which is SHE, a sustainable and honest enterprise, which is building the whole thing in a very sustainable way, in a very traditional way, so that these companies can become very profitable and give good returns to their shareholders and create trust in the startup ecosystem that startups have become mainstream. So I think that's very important. The last point I will make is that many of these startups have got a lot of mind share and attention. But to my mind, many of these are not really going to be employment generators. For example, if you look at the entire IT services industry in India, after 25 years of existence, they have created only 5 million jobs, which is on an average just 0.2 million jobs every year, 2 lakh jobs. Whereas in India, 12 million youth are entering employable age every year and are looking for jobs. So 12 million job seekers versus 0.2 million jobs being created by the IT services industry. So despite all the hype, despite all the attention that they've got, they are not job spinners. And that's the same thing with many of these new age startups as well. They are not going to be job spinners. India's answer is going to be micro entrepreneurship. Therefore, it's important for us as a nation to roll out the red carpet for micro entrepreneurs, roll out the red carpet for medium and small enterprises. Today, we are rolling out the red carpet for large unicorns. We are rolling out the red carpet for Apple and Foxconn that are spending 2,000, 3,000 crores, setting up a factory in some place in India and creating 5,000 jobs. 5,000 jobs is not even a drop in the ocean. So I think it's important for us as a nation to accept micro entrepreneurs, roll out the red carpet for them, make it easy for them to do business. We need, probably millions of these entrepreneurs who will create each of them 5 to 10 jobs. And that's going to be India's answer. Otherwise, India's youth, which we are talking of the youth bulge, the large number of, young people who are entering employable age every year, will probably find themselves stuck in unfulfilling underemployment, not having the right kind of jobs to do. So I think the last phase of India's entrepreneurship will be micro entrepreneurship. So I talked of four mainstream stages of entrepreneurship. Phase one is independence till liberalization, which was a license controlled Raj. Family businesses existed and family businesses thrived. Those who knew how to manipulate the system did well. No first generation entrepreneur dared to set up business. For the first time, Y2K provided that opportunity where first generation entrepreneurs came up very professional. They were created amazing professionally run companies, respect for people, match the Western standards in corporate governance, and also, created very high standards of living for a small section of Indian society, gave India confidence and swagger on the world stage. 2008 was the third stage when I would say, for the first time, entrepreneurs in India dreamt of solving India's problems, many of India's wicked problems, seemingly unsolvable problems for the first time, but still solved problems of only 100 million top of the pyramid consumers. And the fourth phase is when they dared to solve the problems of the underprivileged, the next 400 million Indians in India. I also talked about, willingness to build product companies and the fact that the services companies have laid the foundation to build product companies. And deep tech, I think, is going to be an area where India is going to excel in the years to come. And finally, I talked about micro entrepreneurship as well, which is, I think, India's answer to its massive problem of job creation. With this, let me pause and we can, take questions.
Brilliant, sir. Thank you very much. At that speed, I have jotted down almost all the points manually. And it's very interesting to understand how beautifully you have compiled this evolution of startup ecosystem in India. Actually, there are 5 phases, although you mentioned 4 phases, but I think we should ignore the first one, that is 1947 to independent, 1947 to liberalization, because there's nothing much has happened. So from there onwards, there are 4 phases. Beautifully captured, sir. I will not waste even a moment to summarize because it has already been done by you. I would like to save all the time for the Q&A, and we will have this Q&A in 2 clusters, sir. The first cluster will be handled by Professor Prasad, and I'll come back for the second one. And towards the end, we will also open the mic, depending on the time, for the audience to ask a few more questions directly to you. They will raise their hands and we'll handle that in the second cluster. So, Professor Prasad, I request you to start the first cluster. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rao. Thank you, sir, for a wonderful introduction and a background which has put a framework into this entire thing on startups and entrepreneurship. There are a series of questions about why we are doing this sort of leadership lesson. So I just wanted to take 30 seconds to respond to that. I think one of the most important points is to feel inspired, empowered, to make a difference, because if we just do what we are doing, then there's no innovation and it doesn't connect to startups. So by this initiative, we're trying to bring the best of India to come in person, and those who are the audience are able to see them in flesh and blood, are able to see them speak, and they're able to take whatever they want to take, which you'll never find in a textbook or in a lecture given normally in college. So that actually is basically the motto here. And by bringing all different kinds of flavors, we believe somewhere along the line, something will click. Yeah. Thank you, sir. So here we come to the first question. You've traveled a very long way, and you are actively into entrepreneurship today. If you have to distill the lessons of your satisfaction or success, whichever word is used, how would you put it for the future generation? Oh,
that's a very tough one. I don't know. I will just say that I have tried to find things that I enjoy doing, and I have enjoyed the things that I found. So it's a combination of the two. I think in life, you need to try and figure out what is it that you really like to do and find some of those things. At the same time, life dishes out a few things that you may not enjoy doing as much, but you still need to find happiness. So I think that's worked for me, which is everything that I did had a combination of a few things I liked and a few things I didn't like. I never complained. I was extremely curious. I tried to learn continuously. I tried to learn in every role that I played. And I think gradually in the last 7-8 years, I think I've really been able to do things that played to a lot of my strengths. So I think last 7 years has been the culmination of a lot of work that I had done in the past. And I was fortunate enough in the last 7 years to be able to find a lot of things that I really like doing since my childhood. For example, one of the things I did well was I was an excellent communicator. I could communicate extremely difficult concepts in a manner that anybody would understand, a 6-year-old would understand. And it gave me an opportunity to use that strength and write books. So, for example, writing 7 books in 7 years is really playing to my strengths, which is an ability to communicate, understand, connect the dots, look at patterns, and then explain them in a way that everybody would be able to understand. So, in summary, a combination of try and find the things that you're really good at doing, and also try and like the things that life dishes out to you.
Excellent, sir. I think you put it in a very simple way. Later on in life, if one needs to find that which one can do based on one's strengths, and there are opportunities available to you, one has to be patient, play to the opportunities which come to you before, see happiness in that, and also feel happy about something which you may not otherwise be.
Correct.
And then wait for that time when you really find those strengths.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think you put it spot on. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, sir, for that very beautiful response. There are another set of questions about, things like what kind of basics should be there for a startup, top 5 requirements, key drivers for an entrepreneur, important challenges, why do startups fail? So would you like to throw some light on this aspect?
Yes, I would say, startups fail. Let me come to that first. It's a bit of a misconception. I think the typical venture capital funded startups have a high rate of failure. That's true for the simple reason that, venture capital is only going to back those ideas with a very high with a, good chance of making it really big. And many of the venture capitalists abandon a startup and they realize that this startup is not going to be able to meet our growth expectations. But if you're trying to build, a startup which is not venture capital funded, and if you want to run it profitably like a traditional business, then the failure rate is not very high. So if you're trying to build a traditional business, run it profitably, not aiming for crazy gangbuster growth, then I think the failure rate is not very high. Now, coming to the difficulties of being an entrepreneur. In fact, I've always told somebody, if somebody's approached me and asked me this question, should I take up entrepreneurship? My immediate response is, please don't take up entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is not for the faint-hearted. It's an extremely difficult journey. It will put you through unbelievable amount of stress. Every day, will be stress. There will be some moments of excitement, ecstasy, but there'll be also moments of near death, where you will wonder why you are even living on this planet and what are you trying to do. So I think, it is not for the faint-hearted. So you should never take up entrepreneurship because, you can make a lot of money, because it's the cool thing to do. I think you should take up entrepreneurship for the right reason. There must be a burning desire somewhere inside you that there is a problem that only you can solve in this world. And if you feel so strongly about it, and if you think that you should make an attempt at solving this problem, and even if you fail, it's okay, that's when you should take up entrepreneurship. Otherwise, entrepreneurship is not something that everybody should attempt to do. It's very fashionable to talk about entrepreneurship, but it's an extremely difficult journey. So you should do it only if there is a deep hunger inside you that you want to solve a particular problem and you believe that you are the right person to solve this problem. So I think, building a startup, running a company, from scratch involves innumerable number of difficulties along the way, all kinds of difficulties.
I think you have summed up all the 4 types of questions very well. And I think the key and the most interesting part was you need to have this burning desire, and you must have this feeling that you are the one who can do it and not somebody else. And I think that's the highlight of the entire thing, and that it's pretty difficult, and you should not get it until you have something like this coming along with that. Thank you, sir. We now come to this ecosystem that we have currently, and the role of education. What should institutions do? What should universities do? What should educators do in order to build up this ecosystem for the kind of direction that it needs to take for a country like India?
That's a very difficult question, because in fact today I was there doing a keynote session on that in an event that Economic Times had organized along with Coursera. So where there were participants from vice chancellors from private universities. It was a very interesting discussion. And that's a very hard problem to solve. It's what can academia do, what kind of collaborations should happen between academia and industry to be able to accelerate this whole process of making what is taught in colleges relevant for industry, relevant for entrepreneurship, is not very easy. I think in some ways the universities are also, despite the new education policy, operating with one hand tied behind their backs, because while there is freedom to do a few things, there is also still some constraints, restrictions imposed by state governments, at the university level. So many things exist, and I also think what industry for far too long has been complaining about lack of talent and the fact that academia is not preparing talent sufficiently for industry. I think that's a very wrong attitude. I think industry has to participate far more actively and collaborate far more actively with academia and take ownership for creation of talent rather than simply sit back and expect academia to produce ready-made talent that industry needs. That's just not going to happen. I think if you ask me, what is the difference between entrepreneurship in India, in Bangalore, versus what's happening in a place like Boston or Silicon Valley? I think Silicon Valley is Stanford, and at Boston it's MIT. So the amazing relationship between industry and academia in those ecosystems is working very well, where industry is taking ownership for working with academia for innovation, for the creating the right kind of course contents and all of that. Whereas in India, I think industry is taking an arm's length view, which is that academia, you guys have to get me the right kind of people, and if I feel like helping you, I will help you, but I won't take ownership. So I think that's a big gap that needs to be bridged, and there should be a lot of mutual respect between academia and industry. And I think in India, somehow that mutual respect is not very strong, as a result of which the kind of collaboration that should happen, where there's constant learning from both the parties, is not really happening to the extent it is required. I can try and give you some very superficial answers in terms of what academia could do, but I don't think the superficial answers are very helpful. I think if you ask me, since I'm sorry, this is a bit of a longish answer, but it's a very good question. So I thought, let me take some few minutes on this. So I think, for whatever reasons, in India, I've always said this in the past, which is China got old before it got rich. I think India got educated before it got skilled. And the reason, if you go back to history, thousands of years, the entire caste system, for example, if you take, the society was ordered in a manner that those who peddled some form of education were at the upper end of the caste, and those who were lubricating the wheels of the economy or trade, and those who were working with their hands were at the lowest end of the pyramid, and many of them were not even deeply respected. They were treated as outcasts. So in some ways, that belief system permeates, the Indian way of thinking even today. There was a friend of mine who was interested in education skills. He was there in a village near Jaipur in Rajasthan, and he was talking to the headman of the village, and he asked the headman of the village, like, why don't your sons take up corporate jobs in Jaipur? The headman called his three sons, and he asked my friend to talk to them. And my friend asked them, what have you studied? One of them said, I studied Hindi literature, bachelor's. And he asked him, why did you study Hindi literature? And the answer was very funny, which is that was the only subject which matched my bus timings from my village to Jaipur, and I could do only that subject. So in India, people, prefer to take degrees rather than skill themselves and work with their hands. And then the third son actually was working in the farm. And when the other two sons were asked by my friend, why don't you also work in the farm if you're not getting jobs in corporate? And their response was, how can we work in the farm? We are graduates. So in India, I think a lot of emphasis on this kind of education with zero employability, having no relevance to what industry needs, is there for a very long time. I think it took 75 years to make some fundamental changes to the education policy. Why should it need, for example, an ophthalmologist who studied for 7 years to be able to, prescribe glasses by doing elementary tests? You can have an optometrist who goes through a 1-year program and is allowed, for example, to conduct eye tests and prescribe glasses. So to make some of these changes in India seems so very difficult. I think India's answers are a lot in terms of providing flexibility so that educators can begin to do things which are relevant to industry without sticking to frameworks which are no longer relevant for us.
I think that's a very thoughtful response, and I think we are up facing a gigantic task, and we'll have to feel our way through it as well as evolve as we go along as educational institutions. I think the big thing that you mentioned is about the mindsets and the legacy and the history of India. And this skill thing is below the knowledge thing kind of mindset.
Correct.
Which is impacting everything that we do, how the individual looks at it, how the parents look at it, how society look at it. Hopefully things will change as we go along.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. The next question is about the, how do you implement, people wanted suggestion. You have an idea and you want to do something about it. You want to make it a product, then you want to see that you're doing well on that product. So what kind of stages, what do you think people should look out for in this particular journey? Some very important things that they should not miss out.
Yeah. So I would just simply start by saying an idea is a commodity. You put 10 smart people into a room, 5 smart people into a room, lock them up for 24 hours, and they will come up with some of the best ideas in this world. Every idea that mattered will come out in 24 hours. So to me, an idea is a commodity, and an idea does not make a startup successful or a failure. It is the quality of execution. It is the quality of responses to situations that develop along the way. It is the ability to make the right kind of pivots. It's the ability to deal with ups and downs, resilience, problem solving, agility, ability to, go through that difficult journey without losing hope. So all of those to me are far more important than an idea. So, that's the reason why so many ideas really fail. And that's why at an early stage, when we evaluate, ideas, we don't care about the idea. Mostly it's about the founder. Does the founder have the ability to execute? Does the founder have the resilience to, go through ups and downs? Do they have the ability to hire the right kind of people with them? So it is just about evaluating the quality of the founding team. We don't really look at the idea at all. Ideas don't matter. And that's the reason why many people with great ideas don't succeed. So it is about, executing the idea along the way and making a success of that is what really matters. So I think if a person has an idea, it's a great starting point. But the point is that 10 other people can have exactly the same idea. 10 other people can copy your idea, because an idea is, when you start executing an idea, 10 people can see it and they can copy it. So whoever executes well is going to succeed, not the person who got the idea first. So I think for success, you need all the other traits that I talked about, which is resilience, ability to deal with ups and downs, and ability to hire, being a magnet for talent, attracting smart people, inspiring them to join your journey, give up well-paying jobs to be part of your journey. All of that is really what makes the difference.
I think, sir, you have redefined the issue which has been raised and brought center stage, the aspect which is related to the founder as well as the execution, and the other things you feel if you get these two things right, the other things will fall into
Correct.
place as it goes along. And I think the behaviorals, the attitudes, the terms that you used, agility, perseverance, resilience, all these matter.
Correct.
So the next question, sir, is about, I think there have been a query about, would you recommend any books for life or business from your personal experiences in this field?
Yeah, there are many books that one can read. For example, 0 to 1, Peter Thiel. There is a book by Ben Horowitz called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Then there is a book by Morgan Housel about the story of money. So there are many books that are worth reading. I think it depends on what is the specific topic that is of interest. For example, I think, and there are many good books.
I think we've been given enough starting points to read our way through.
Yeah.
A last question in this cluster, sir. We've been talking about the ecosystem. How do you see this evolving over the next 5 years? I mean, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I think what is going to happen will to a large extent depend upon how some of the companies that have currently gone public, how do they fare? Can they turn profitable very quickly? Do they live up to the promise that they had provided their shareholders, or will some of them fizzle out? If many of them succeed, then I think it's going to give a lot of hope to other entrepreneurs to go out and build businesses. One change that I definitely see is that going forward, more and more traditional ways of building businesses will prevail. So the VC way of building a business, which is scale very crazily, not really care about profitability, not really care about governance, but get it to a scale very quickly, get a large number of customers to use your, your product or service, even if it is not done very profitably. I think that entire approach is being questioned and is being tested. I think more traditional ways of building a business sustainably are what will survive. So I think entrepreneurship, there is no alternative to entrepreneurship. It will continue. I think entrepreneurship has become mainstream in India. More and more entrepreneurs will try to build companies. There are sufficient number of problems in India. I think India is a very fertile ground to create the right kind of excitement for entrepreneurs, because what do entrepreneurs feel inspired by? They feel inspired by looking around them, and if they can see a large number of problems. So India is full of problems. So I think it will continue to inspire entrepreneurs, big and small. But I think the traditional way of principles of building a business will get reinforced more and more.
Excellent, sir. So there's a lot at stake for those who have already gone out to succeed. And I think whoever they are, the stakeholders need to ensure that that is maximized, and that will kind of accelerate the whole thing up.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is so large that there will be some people who are going to succeed. And so entrepreneurship is here to stay.
Yeah.
However, it may become a bit more traditional and not the growth oriented, without looking at unit economics or profitability. So I think that's the kind of story which is coming up. Thank you very much, sir. We come to an end to this cluster. I hand it back to Professor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. I think it's very, very interesting to keep quiet and listen to you. That's what I have done all the while, and I'm willing to do that even in the next few minutes. That is one way of actually making room for those enthusiastic participants to raise questions directly. So I request all of them to raise their hands, and I'll take a few questions in the interim. At one point, I thought we are asking an author what are the best books to recommend. So someone who has authored 7 books, we are asking him to talk about books. Yet you have given names of 3 other books. Thank you so much, sir. I think I have read 2 of your books, and they're very interesting. And I closely follow your work.
Thank you.
Very, very interesting. So I think at this point, I want to mention to all the participants that just go Google and take up those titles and read the reviews. And if you're interested, I think go ahead and purchase those books. Thank you so much. Sir, the question I want to, before ask this question, I want to actually once again appreciate the fact that we have some of the finest leaders who have joined today from academics, from IT, ITS, from social work as well have joined today. So very interesting. I welcome all of them once again to this conversation. So the first question in the second cluster is your call and outlook for the future of entrepreneurship in India is that micro and small businesses, micro, medium, small businesses. What are the government schemes that are supporting these? Is that ecosystem sufficiently encouraging to make that happen? If not, what else that you would recommend the government to actually create and foster that ecosystem for small and micro entrepreneurs?
I think there is a very strong intent on the part of the government in terms of easing the process for doing business. But I still think a lot more can be done, because while the intent is there at a very senior level, when it comes to implementation on the ground, I think those same principles about making the life of these smaller entrepreneurs easy has not percolated. Getting an electrical connection probably is still very difficult. The penalties for unintentional violations of a particular law can be very serious. So I think in India, you need to begin to differentiate between intentional violations of a law versus, violations which are committed during the course of a business without the intent to deliberately violate the law by ignorance. So I think by providing equal punishments for both, we are not encouraging the right kind of behaviors. So, and I think also, we can't have the same kind of laws applicable for all kinds of businesses. For example, the idea of minimum wages. Minimum wages are set at a level which make it relevant for the larger companies, or the bigger of the smaller companies can afford to pay minimum wages and still be profitable, but the micro enterprises, I don't know if they can really pay minimum wages, for instance. So is there a way that the government can support the much smaller industries in terms of minimum wages, in terms of provident fund contributions, in terms of making the labor laws far easier to implement, making it easier for these companies to even shut down their businesses? I think a lot of good work is being done. There's a lot of intention, but somewhere I think as things percolate to the ground, that same sense of urgency is not being demonstrated by the junior officers, is my view. I may or may not be completely correct.
Great, sir. The takeaway is that more than the intent at the top levels of the government and its functioning, I think at the ground level, we need to make that difference. And also the laws will have to be customized towards helping the small and micro entrepreneurs, especially in terms of minimum wages, in terms of various other labor laws as well. We'll quickly move to the second question. That is, how do you identify the impact created by, say, a platform or an incubator or an accelerator? Based on your experience, what would you recommend? What is the formula for actually identifying the impact created by these vehicles?
I think I'm not really sure how effective incubators and accelerators in India have been. I don't know if anyone has systematically studied this, but I think broadly, both these are effective vehicles in driving innovation in an ecosystem. Because what happens is that in the absence of these vehicles, entrepreneurs don't get the right kind of support. So even if an entrepreneur has a great idea, they have no idea. They don't know, for example, how to develop that idea further, how to take it commercial, how to, go to market and sell their products. So how to build a product, even, for example, design thinking, technology. So I think they have a lot of questions which are not answered in the absence of these vehicles. I think these vehicles have made it very easy, potentially, for would-be entrepreneurs or even entrepreneurs to be able to build out that idea and accelerate their journey. In fact, even bring, angel investors together so that the good ideas can even be funded very quickly without individual founders having to go and raise money. It is these accelerators which are able to evaluate ideas and are able to provide funding platforms as well. So to my mind, I think these vehicles have had a very positive impact in terms of accelerating innovation in India. If you look at many incubators, they're actually on college campuses. And some really great companies have emerged from some of these college campuses. For example, if you look at the IIT Technology Park, IIT Madras Technology Park, several good companies have emerged from, that technology park. Ather, for example, the electric vehicles company, has come out from there, and some good companies have, emerged. So I think the government across states in India, by providing the right kind of accelerators, incubators, is, I think, encouraging innovation. However, I don't really know, to what extent exactly they have been effective.
Great, sir. Just to extend that point, Government of Telangana has come up with an incubator, which actually is driving innovation in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship, and it's called T-Hub.
Yeah, I know T-Hub very well, actually.
Yeah. So how would you rate T-Hub in terms of its impact, or in terms of the work that it has done vis-a-vis some of the similar kind of vehicles abroad, for example, Station F in Paris?
Yeah, so I think T-Hub in Hyderabad is driven with a lot of energy. I think the people behind T-Hub, whether it is Mr. KTR or someone like Jayesh Ranjan, who is a principal secretary, or MSR. So they are, fairly visionary leaders, and the way the entire T-Hub is set up, not many states in India can probably boast of something like this. And I think in Kerala also they have done an amazing job, which is the idea of a Kerala Startup Mission. And Kerala Startup Mission also in some ways is an accelerator. And it has helped, create the right kind of innovation in the ecosystem. So I think to me, the T-Hub model can actually be taken and implemented in different states in India. So it's a great model for many states in India to replicate, but to compare it with the Paris one, I really don't have data. So
yes, sir. So we'll very quickly we'll request Professor Shailendra Bisht, who wanted to ask a question on SMEs as well as Sujata Garu. I think first we'll take Sujata. Your question, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Good evening, all, sir. This is Sujata, Dr. Sujata from ICMR NIN. So this is the question, because I could find street food is very, very nutrition and again, very good to taste. But when you think about the hygienic conditions, when you have that, the street food, but the infrastructure is not at all made for them, and again, not at all prepared for them to survive also. No, all the small size vendors, they should provide such a facility, or even including gas. Even they cook on some stoves and all. So how it's possible to make it a better small size business model where they can really benefit with help from the government, state government or central government? That's my question. So because I keep seeing so many, because we do some documentaries also, we do some studies also related to this nutrition level. Wonderful. In each and every Indian state has a beautiful cuisines, prepared in when you think about Kolkata, when you think about Mumbai, everywhere I could find out. So I would like to know what are the better facility you can provide for them, where they can have even everybody can consume. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, I really don't have a good answer to this question, so I don't think I will attempt answering this, what governments can do for some of these smaller street vendors. I don't think I will have an answer to this.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. I think in one of the sessions that we have had recently, a leader mentioned that a great classroom is that where the teacher says, we will go back and find some answers. At this point in time, we don't have answer to your questions. I think such classrooms are very interesting and worth attending such classes. So this is one more example here. Thank you, sir. I'm requesting Shailendra Bisht to raise his question on. He's actually deeply connected with such organizations, and several projects have been conducted. He's an academic leader at ICFAI in Hyderabad. Over to you, Shailendra. Well, looks like there is a connectivity issue. In the interim, we'll take something else. Sir, there is a very simple question. I don't want to oversimplify it. I still like to take it up. This question has been asked many times. What type of startup is the best to start in India? I think from participants' point of view, I think it's important that you respond to this. Kindly respond to this. What type of startup is best?
See, there are two ways to think about this question, and no way is right or wrong. One way of thinking about it is what I said some time back, which is, what is an idea that you are deeply passionate about as an entrepreneur? What is the problem that you think you can solve better than anybody else? What do you think is a problem that will keep you engaged during the course of your startup's journey? You should pick that problem, a problem which excites you, a problem that you're really good at solving, and a problem at which you are better than most other people. The other way of looking at it is that, what is a problem which is big enough for me to create a large business? So I may or may not be interested in that domain, or that idea may or may not excite me, but the problem is so big that I can use first principles thinking, build a strong team, and build a good business around that. So there are two ways of looking at it. And my personal bias is to build a business around an idea that you feel very deeply passionate about. So that's the way I would see it.
Great. Great. I think that sums up the way we look at the process altogether, or the approach in terms of the idea which excites you and keeps you off from your sleep. And you think that you're the right person to address that particular problem. And the other way is, there is a very big problem, and that big problem has a potential to build a big business around it. So I think that really addresses. So I think Professor Shailendra Bisht is back. Over to you, Shailendra. We are not able to hear you. Yeah, in the meantime, we'll take one more question that one of the participants has raised, sir. With your permission, I would like to ask this. How to safeguard new product innovation ideas or IPRs during the initial meetings with VCs and investors? I think your tips in this area could be useful to a large number of aspirants.
Yeah, so I think, frankly, I'm not a great believer in IP and all of that, unless the kind of work that is being done is of a very deep nature, which requires a lot of investment in, time, research that goes into creating some of those things. I think the IP really comes in an ability to execute. It is not about, you can take some interesting idea and then develop a patent around it, apply for patents. But then the moment you apply for a patent, everybody in the world gets to know about an idea. My own belief is that ability to execute, ability to go through the journey, perseverance, that is something that nobody can copy. So in fact, whenever people ask me, can you send me a deck? Can you send me this deck? Wherever I have worked for, I've said, yeah, take this deck. If you really want to, if you think you can build a business by looking at an idea or looking at a company's deck, then go ahead and build your business. So I think, the best, defense or the best entry barrier is your ability to execute really well, much better than what others can. Because it is not in an idea, as I said, no point patenting most ideas, because ideas are dime a dozen. It is the ability to execute, perseverance, resilience, all those things can never be copied.
Brilliant point, sir. I think the ability to execute differentiates you from the rest more than the idea in itself. Thank you so much, sir. We'll request Professor Shailendra to now raise his question. Otherwise, Shweta Anand can directly go to her question.
Thank you very much once again. I'm so sorry for this. Thank you, Mr. Hari, for being so patient with this as well. So there are two ideas that I heard during your talk. I mean, this comes from your book as well, which is Saying No to Jugaad. And the idea that you just threw around, which is about how the government might want to decriminalize certain economic offenses related to the startup world. But we have also seen that especially micro entrepreneurs and people who do not have enough resources for compliances, what could be done to make sure that their lives are easier? I mean, the compliance burden right now on startups, and especially, let's say, e-commerce, is too much. And a lot of smaller startups, as well as, I would say, micro entrepreneurs, the idea that you were championing earlier, they seem to be stuck in spending a lot of energy and the fear of going to jail. If not. So that is that decriminalization of economic offenses. And I think the state is working on it, but what could be done more on that part?
Manish Sabharwal of Team Lease has written a lot about this. In fact, he has quoted the number of laws, that govern the life of many of these entrepreneurs is so huge in India that despite all our claims about ease of doing business, nothing is really working on the ground. So I think a lot can be done in terms of decriminalizing economic offenses. So, the intention behind the violation of a law, whether the intention, it was an intentional violation, whether it was a violation out of ignorance, distinctions should be made around many of those. The number of compliances, the fear of going to jail is so high in India, which makes me sometimes feel very pessimistic that in India, we talk a lot about ease of doing business, but on the ground, that's the point I've always made, which is that on the ground, things don't seem to change for the little guy. Things are made very easy. Red carpets are opened up, rolled out for the biggies. But for the little guy, I think life on the ground hasn't changed a great deal. The fear of going to jail, the fear, the need to manage factory inspectors and the regulators, the fear of going to jail is so high in India today. It's just unbelievable. So I don't know what to say. I mean, many people have written about this, talked about this, and on the, at very high levels, even government circles, there is an agreement that all this has to change. But then when it comes to translation on the ground, I think the problem that everybody encounters is that to prevent one person from misusing something, we prevent 100 people from benefiting by easing those regulations. We are always worried that one person might misuse if you liberalize. Let that one person misuse, take some very exemplary action on those who are misusing, but don't make the law so difficult so that you want to prevent that one person from misusing, so that you make life difficult for 100 other people. So I would say make life easy, award exceptional punishments to those who are knowingly violating the law, treat them as examples to be called out. So I think that kind of an approach is very essential. Until then, this entire business of ease of doing business is just not very convincing.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shailendra, for that interesting question. We'll go to Shweta Anand.
Hi, good evening, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. Sir, my question is, actually, I'll go back to the year 2009 and I'll quote Satyam Ramalingal Raju saying that it was like riding a lion or tiger and not knowing how to tame it.
Yes.
And yes, and that given the scenario when in 2007 and 2008, Satyam was awarded the Golden Peacock Award for corporate governance.
Corporate governance, I know that.
Now we have in 2023, we have the case of Adani, and we have many unicorns following the same pathways where they are overvaluating the shares. And so what should be the checkpoints, sir? And you spoke about sustainable business model.
Yes.
How to ensure that there is sustainability in this model.
Correct.
Because it shakes the entire infrastructure, the faith and the belief in entrepreneurship. So how to ensure that? Sir?
Yeah. So I think there are two ways to look at it. One is I would distinguish the principles that should apply to running a public company versus the principles that should be taken into account while running a private company. I think once a company becomes public, very, very stringent standards must be applied to corporate governance issues. And any deviation of corporate governance issues, if it's discovered to be knowingly committed, there must be exemplary punishment. And all cases must be closed and resolved very quickly. When it comes to private companies which are venture funded, I don't have such a strong view, because I think, private companies are running on venture money, and venture money is not the money that belongs to a poor little retail investor or a widow or a pensioner. It belongs to high net worth individuals who know what they are going in for. And if there are corporate governance issues which lead to valuations coming off, then the investors suffer. So I would be a little liberal when it comes to allowing these private companies to operate. But the moment a private company becomes a public or is on the path of becoming a public company, then I think the stringency, the standards of governance must increase at least 10 to 20 times. And yeah, coming to the case of Satyam, I think it's a very interesting case. I was actually those days in Hyderabad when I saw that letter that he wrote out, riding a tiger, difficult to get off, all of that. And interestingly, Satyam board was one of the most illustrious boards, which is you had someone called Krishna Palepu from Harvard Business School. You had Ram Mohan Rao, who was the dean of ISB. You had the cabinet secretary, T.R. Prasad on the board. But interestingly, none of these illustrious board members were able to spot the fraud that Satyam had committed. I mean, are these board members so incompetent? Are these board members paid by the founders to keep to turn a blind eye to all that is happening, not ask difficult questions? So this again brings back to some questions around corporate governance, effectiveness of boards in, asking the founders the right kind of questions. So from time to time, I think some of these blow-ups are inevitable, and it is as long as these blow-ups lead to some corrective steps, they are well and good. So for example, when Enron broke up in the US and the scandal became big, it led to a piece of legislation called Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Sarbanes-Oxley Act actually became a very bureaucratic act, which made it very difficult for companies to even operate, because they had to conform to thousands of pages of legal compliances, which made it really difficult to do business. So I think if companies don't behave responsibly, then I think regulators will create extremely onerous and complex compliance processes, which in turn will make it difficult for them to do business. So longish answer to your question, I think valuations coming off, we are seeing some of those. There was no need for example, a Paytm to try and get the biggest IPO. That was Vijay Shekhar Sharma's objective, which was, how can we have an IPO which is bigger than LIC's IPO? Instead of thinking, how can retail investors benefit by investing in Paytm? He didn't really care about that. There were shares which were sold at 2150 rupees. And within a few months, the same share was selling in the market at 600 rupees, 500 rupees. So retail investors who invested in Paytm lost a huge amount of money. What kind of governance is that? Very, very poor quality governance. So I think, I am not even a believer that profitable companies should be allowed to list. I think SEBI in India has been very liberal. In the interest of encouraging the startup ecosystem, they have allowed loss-making private companies to list. I personally, if you ask me, my opinion is that they should not be allowed to list till they have demonstrated a track record of profitability. That was the way it was in the past. That was a very sensible way of doing things. So I think some of that has changed, and to me, not for the good.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much on that response related to corporate governance. So there is one more interesting point a participant is trying to find out. Can a person without any finance background and no network at all, can that person start up? Is it possible? How to grow the network, one's own network? So that's it.
It's a long, you can start a business without finance and without networking, but very quickly you need to understand the finances. You need to very quickly figure out how to network, because ultimately what is an entrepreneur, what is business building? A large amount of that is because of networking with potential investors, networking with clients, customers, networking with talent in the market, networking with potential prospects, employees. Networking is inevitable. So you can't take a stand that, I don't have a network, but I still want to start a business. Very quickly you should learn how to network. Very quickly you should learn how to read a P&L, how to read a balance sheet, how to look at cash flows. What are some of the important ratios? So it's very important to quickly understand some of these basics and quickly understand how to recruit people who are good at these. So I think you can start a business, certainly, but you can't go for long without building the basic skills around these two areas.
Great, sir. Networking is inevitable. Yes, that's the take-home message. And Srinivas Rao is asking another question, that is, the MSMEs are classified generally into two classes, that is manufacturing enterprises and service enterprises. Yes, according to you, out of the two, which sector will have more striking business in future in terms of sustainability?
I think potentially both. India, for whatever reasons, the current government has gone down the path of Make in India. So there has been a huge push for manufacturing industries in India. And for the first time, I think we are also seeing, Indian companies entering the defense sector. In the past, Indian companies were never there in the defense sector. Most of our defense equipment were imported. For the first time, I think a lot of Indian parties are able to, build products, weapons for, the armed forces. So I think it's a good step, which is manufacturing in India, Make in India. Although I'm not very sure how effective it's going to be, how easy it is going to be to manufacture in India. But to some extent, I think some of the critical sectors like defense, I think it is very essential that we become self-sufficient. So irrespective of whether we can begin to manufacture everything like China did, which is going to be very difficult, but at least in the defense sector and space and other areas, it's important to become self-sufficient, because you're seeing the international geopolitics that's happening, and it's very difficult for a country to take a very strong independent position when it comes to geopolitics if you don't have the necessary muscle to build your own equipment, defense equipment. So if China bullies you on the border, you feel a little helpless if you're dependent on China, American or Russian weapons. So in some areas, I think Make in India is pretty much inevitable and the right thing. But comparing services and manufacture, I really am not, I don't think I can do that really well.
Excellent, sir. Excellent. Thank you so much for those detailed responses. A great communicator that you are. I think everything is well understood by all of us. I'm actually really enjoying, and there are many other questions, but some of them have already been touched upon. I want to mention here that ICFAI as an institute has been one of the first few children of liberalization. In that economy, ICFAI was established as a business school, and then it did extremely well. And we have now come around to have about 20 campuses in 17 states across large formats and multiple programs. And so we all the time, we owe it, our origins are actually owed to liberalization, which is the first phase which you described. Thank you so much for that. And some of the names that you have taken as bright young startups that are entering into bastions erstwhile not opened up. For example, putting rockets into the sky, Skyroot. The founder of Skyroot was here a few months back, and he spoke about the plans, especially exactly 1 year back, I think he was here, and he was talking about his plans, and all the plans actually worked out very well very recently. So many such leaders, youngsters and established seasoned leaders, veterans have spoken and shared their lessons. We distilled those things and we compiled that into books. And also we put up summaries and videos shared for public in our archives. Sir, this interesting conversation is something that I will treasure for a long time. Before I wrap it up, I request Professor Prasad if he has any question to take up. Otherwise, we are at 7:50.
I think by and large, the responses have covered the questions.
We did a very good job, right, Professor Prasad?
And I think the speaker has done an even more wonderful job.
Thank you.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think the simplified way, easy to read kind of books and guides are available in the past. I think some of us have gone through such books. I think this talk falls into that category of simplifying everything and making it easy for us to learn and decipher, especially the several phases of entrepreneurship, how India has moved, how it has evolved over several phases has been very nicely compiled. Thank you so much for that, sir. And there are brilliant takeaways for all of us, especially the nuances that you mentioned, from solving problems of the West to solving problems that India has been facing. I think we started getting deeper into that. Our problem-solving abilities have got penetrated into the large market that we have and the large diverse problems, which are very unique to India, that some of the startups and entrepreneurs have started working on. I think that's a brilliant nuance and the trend that you have picked up. Moving from labor arbitrage, that's what we witnessed in the initial phases, to a knowledge, research, and leadership kind of phenomenon that we witnessed in this entrepreneurship game. I think lack of faith in entrepreneurship from government to shifting it to institutional faith in academic institutions, for example, start with, then parental faith, societal faith. I think we have covered a lot of ground. It's very easy to say that nothing has happened, but based on the story, based on the anecdotes that you have discussed, I think a lot of ground has been covered. Yes, much more to go ahead. Given the fact that our background and our culture, especially keeping education above skills or knowledge above skills, from there, I think if we have to come to actually working on what Silicon Valley has done or what Boston has done, I think our Bangalore's and our Hyderabad's and our Mumbai's will have to take a big leap and go forward. Long back, I remember there was a delegation to Stanford, and one of our colleagues was asking a question: what is the thing that you do differently in Stanford, which we don't do back home in India? That's a very, very interesting question, and the answers are well known. I think some of those points you have also mentioned. From being a service excellent companies to product companies, I think we have also moved towards deep tech, as you mentioned. This is another important trend that you have explained to us. And of course, those issues where infrastructure was not okay while we were actually growing and getting into the third phase of this evolution of entrepreneurship, that also is addressed now. To a large extent, the infrastructure will also have to become better, but compared to what it was, I think we have covered a lot of ground there. And your outlook that India's problems can be solved, or India's future lies in actually encouraging and making MSMEs big I think that is there are cues for not just entrepreneurs here, but also cues for the government and the other policy makers across. Above all, I have liked a very interesting take that you have on academia versus industry. I think you have taken some time to explain it extremely well. Every time there's a recruiter on campus or there's a recruiter who speaks in public, says, are your students ready for industry? I think that's a pretty loaded kind of question, as you mentioned. So sometimes we should also ask, is the industry ready for these new age students? Probably we need to collaborate and share the ownership in probably creating a new cadre of professionals and leaders out of these universities and educational institutions. So they can't actually maintain a distance and keep on creeping, which is generally prevalent in India and not in the Western world. The mutual respect that you mentioned between industry and academia is something that has to grow by working together, by collaborating greatly. And the last point I would like to mention, apart from the many other things that you highlighted, is about idea itself is not great, but the ability to have an amazing execution, the founder having that wherewithal to cite his colleagues, look at those people who can solve problems other than himself or herself, and create an infrastructure and a system and a plan to very differentiatingly execute that idea. So idea itself is not great, but execution is. I think that's a fantastic point, and it's going to be useful for all of us. Some of these we have incorporated in our own curriculum and also in the way we handle these entrepreneurship practicum courses across both campus programs as well as online programs. Even Professor Prasad would like to add a point here. I think we have tried and understood how this entrepreneurship can be given support and encouragement by involving more and more industry players, especially those who fail, those startups, those entrepreneurs who have failed. Identify and talk about the failure stories to the extent possible. Of course, the track record of success will also give us huge lessons, but it should not be like one of those lopsided, overly written cases of the iSchools in India about these placements. Everyone thinks that every other student gets the 1 crore package, which is largely untrue. So I think it has to be realistically handled, and there's a responsibility of all the stakeholders in this ecosystem. Professor Prasad, any comments from you?
I think, for the program that we are handling, particularly with working professionals, we have a completely different, what I would call the equivalent of lab space. You've got the workspace of the individual, and where they face problems day in and day out, and they're also trying to innovate. I think that's a very good starting point to try and connect and put it as a base around which the program rotates. And whatever they learn, if they're able to bring that and put perspectives in and try to build a better solution, I'm sure their employers are waiting to give them the next big thing.
Great. So with that, on behalf of all the participants, on behalf of ICFAI, I would like to wholeheartedly thank Mr. T.N. Hari for this valuable time, energy, and the tips from the expertise that he has gained over several years. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So friends, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next week. That is on 17th of March. We are going to have a unicorn. Is the first unicorn on our platform. This is a blockchain related unicorn. It's called Fire. And we are going to have the founder Pratik Gauri talking to all of us how a new leadership mindset is required to build a sustainable blockchain in India. So we look forward to meeting all of you at 6:30 p.m. on March 17th. Till then, browse through some of the books written by Mr. T.N. Hari and understand more about the journey of startups and how some of the companies have interestingly built very well in a sustainable way. And several anecdotes and several matter-of-factly examples given by Sir are very useful. And we keep reading and we keep learning. And that's one of the formats is these leadership conversations, as Professor Prasad has mentioned. So thank you all. See you next Friday, and good night.